Okay, I guess I'll start the presentation at this point. Welcome to everybody who's joined online. I'm Ron van der Meyden, and what I'll be presenting is joint work that was done with Michael Ma. And the context for this presentation is it's part of a larger project that we've done, the motivation of which was to look at developing smart contracts on a particular type of financial contract, that is safe contracts. And in the course of doing that, we needed to really get in and understand what those contracts are and how they work. And in the process of that, we came to a feeling that there were lots of things about the design of these contracts that were not completely right. So what I'll be presenting today is information just about the financial structure of safe contracts. Okay, so I'll point to a number of issues which are listed there on the slide. And then towards the end of the talk, I'll actually make a proposal for how I think the actual terms of safe contracts can actually be improved based on the issues that we've identified. So that'll be the talk today, and then next week what I'll present is something about the actual work of taking that analysis and then developing a smart contract that represents safe contracts on the blockchain. Okay, so there will be nothing about that this week. This talk will be purely about financial issues concerning safes. Okay, so disclaimer, I'm a computer scientist, as is Michael. So I'm not coming from the background in finance or accountancy or law. So if there's anything, so don't sort of rely upon anything that we're saying. We're very interested in hearing from people who do have such expertise as to whether we've got it right and what your opinion is of the work that we've done here. Okay, so first to introduce what are safe contracts for those people who are not familiar with them. They're a type of equity financing contract that was originally proposed in around 2013 by Y Combinator, which is an accelerator, a very well-known accelerator. Lots of famous companies have come through that in Silicon Valley. So they issued the initial form of these safe contracts in 4 versions. And what they are is essentially a version of an instrument that has been around for a while called convertible bonds, but this version removes terms that relate to interest payments, essentially, and that's one of the main changes. And the overall idea was to try to simplify the process of providing early stage funding to a company as much as possible. And so, in particular, to simplify the negotiations that the founders might have with early investors around what is the valuation of a company, essentially kicking the can down the road and leaving that question up to the time of an equity round. In 2018, Y Combinator changed the terms of the safe contracts that it was issuing to the companies going through the accelerator to something called post-money safes. So we'll discuss in this talk both of these types of safes, the original pre-money safes as well as the post-money safes. Okay, so let's look at this from the point of view of the company life cycle. So you found a company, you're doing a startup, you have Sergey and Larry hacking away in a garage, and you take your first form of financing, which might be coming from angels or friends and family. Okay, so that's the seed funding. And then at some point later, you might take a round of funding from a venture capitalist who provides larger bags of money. And there may be several rounds of that. And then other things that might happen in the life cycle of the company is that eventually the company goes public, or it gets acquired, or fails and is dissolved. Okay, so where do safe contracts fit in here? Safes are for the very early stages of funding the company. And the essential question the safes are addressing in order to simplify negotiation between the angel investors going to be putting some money into the company and the founders is just what is the company worth? Well, it's just a couple of people hacking away in their garage, and we don't actually know what the value of this company is going to end up being. So it's very hard to put a valuation on the company. So instead of issuing shares based on some valuation to the angel investor, what the safe contract allows you to do is to say, okay, well, we don't know what this is worth. Let's wait for a while until we actually get the company mature enough to do an equity round with the venture capitalist, who will then at that time be providing a valuation on the company on the basis of which we'll be issuing shares with the venture capitalist. And instead of issuing shares right now, the angel is going to get a safe contract, which will, at the time of that first equity round, convert into shares according to some formula. Okay? So that's the overall idea. It's basically kicking the can down the road on the question of what is the valuation of the company. Okay, so now, in fact, as I said, there's this life cycle of companies, so various things can happen to companies. So the safe contracts actually identify three types of events. One is the first equity financing. Another is a liquidity event, by which they mean a change of control, like a buyout of the company or an initial public offering, or then finally a failure of the company, which is a dissolution event, and we shut the company down and distribute any remaining assets to the investors. Safe contracts come in 4 different versions. So there's 2 parameters, the cap and the discount, and you might have one or the other in 4 different combinations. You have no cap and no discount, a cap, just a discount, or both a cap and a discount. Okay, and as I said, in 2018, there was a change to, we'll be discussing later on what that change was to the post-money form of the contract. Okay, now there's these 4 versions of the safes. What I'm going to be talking about is just one of these 4 versions, the safes that have a cap but no discount. I think a lot of the things that I'll be saying apply to the other forms of safe, but we're not going to be, I think the math ends up being essentially very, very similar, but not exactly the same. But we won't try to cover any of the other forms. Okay, here's some actual text from the safe contract. So the overall contract is about sort of 5 or 6 pages. So it has a lot of natural language text. It looks like this. This is a clause of the contract that talks about what happens in the event of an equity financing. Okay, I won't try to read through all of this text. Rather, on the next slide, what I've got is a mathematical description, which is easier to look at and understand, I think. So we've got various things happening here. So we've got some amount of principal that the investor is some money that the investor is giving to the company. So M here is representing money. There's the parameter called the cap, which is also a dollar amount. There's the pre-money shares. That is typically this would be the shares held by the founders of the company. And then at the time of the first equity round, the safe is going to convert into some number of shares. So we've got a parameter there that is talking about what are the number of shares that the safe holder will get at the time of the equity round. Okay, those shares are going to be issued based upon what at the time of the equity round is the pre-money valuation that is put on the company. And the new investor is going to be paying some price for those shares, and that's the T new entry there. Okay, so what does the equity financing clause say? This is a simplified version of it. It says some things about the option pool. I'm going to ignore that. Assume that that's sort of built into the pre-money shares, if you like. Okay, so what the equity financing clause says is that if the pre-money valuation is less than or equal to cap, then the number of shares issued to the safe holder is equal to the amount of money that the safe holder invested divided by the price that the new investor is paying for their shares in the equity round. And essentially that particular clause of the contract can be understood as providing the investor with some downside protection. Okay, the other clause says that if the pre-money valuation is greater than the cap, then the safe converts into a number of shares equal to the money that the safe investor provided, divided by what's called the safe price, which is determined by this formula. The safe price is equal to the cap divided by the number of pre-money shares. Okay, and essentially the way that we can understand this particular clause is providing the safe investor with some upside gain. Effectively, the safe price is going to end up being lower than the price that the new investor is paying. Okay, so the safe investor here is getting some benefit for having invested early in the company. And so they end up holding more shares compared to the amount of money that they're putting in. Okay, so that's what the safe contract says. And now to understand what the effect of this contract is going to be, let's have a look at what the standard formulas are when you do an equity round for a company that hasn't issued any safes. In this case, there's no safes involved with the equity round, so let's just see what happens there. Okay, well, we've got some pre-money shares, we've got some pre-money valuation. Okay, typically the price that the new investor is going to be paying for the shares that they're buying with new money is the pre-money valuation divided by the number of pre-money shares. Okay, and then to work out how many shares does the new investor get, we divide the money that they're contributing, the new, okay, by that new price. Okay, so the formula that we get for how many shares does the new investor get is what's on the right-hand side here. Okay, so that's all before those shares are issued. Now, once we've issued those shares, we're in a sort of post-money state of the company. So what's the valuation of the company and after the equity round is completed? Well, what's it worth? Well, it had some value before the equity round. It's just received some new money in the bank. So we add that new money to the pre-money valuation. That gives us the post-money valuation. So that's what we usually mean by post-money valuation for an equity round. And the textbooks will say that's what the post-money valuation is. Okay, and then the number of post-money shares that we have is whatever shares that were before the equity round plus the new shares that have been issued to the equity round investors. Okay, so if we can calculate, okay, what's the amount of post-money value per post-money share, and we do a little bit of mathematics, what we find is that the price for the post-money shares is the same as the price that the new investor paid. Okay, so that's how a standard equity round works. Okay, now the trouble is that once you have safes in the story and you apply these formulas, then, and so in particular, you say the way that you calculate the price for the new investor is the pre-money valuation divided by the pre-money shares, and the way that you think about the post-money valuation is equal to the pre-money valuation plus the new money. Okay, well, what happens is that the number of shares that you have after the equity round, in the case that the company's issued safes, is that there's not just the pre-money shares and the new investor shares, but there's also shares that appear sort of, as it were, magically out of thin air that have been issued to the safe holders in exchange for their safe contracts. Okay, and if you think about that for a while, what that means is that in this equity round involving safes, the new investor is getting the value of what they're buying in the equity round immediately diluted by the shares that are being issued to the safe investor. So they're left holding shares that are of value less than the money that they just put into the company. Okay, so this is a bit odd. Okay, and this particular I had on the slide here. This particular understanding seems to be the understanding, if you look at the 2012 documentation associated by the SAFEs that was issued by White Holiday, that there actually is this dilution going on if you look at their examples. Okay, but let's try to understand that a little bit more clearly from an accounting point of view. What's really going on here? Well, before the equity round, the company has some assets, it has some liabilities, but it's also issued these SAFE contracts. And there's some number of pre-money shares that have been issued. Okay, well, one way we can do the accounting of this situation is to say, okay, we've got the assets and we've got the liabilities, and we count the SAFE as being one of the liabilities that the company has. It's a contract that they've issued to the SAFE investor. So we can think of that as a liability. Okay, so in this case, the cap table just consists of the pre-money shares. And so what we find now is that what is the pre-money valuation of the company? Well, we value the assets and liabilities, so we take the assets minus the liabilities. But then we've also got the SAFE as a liability. So if we've got some value over the SAFE, then we subtract that also to get the pre-money valuation. Now, what happens after the equity round is that the SAFE converts into shares, so it's no longer a liability of the company. Okay, so what's the post-money valuation now? Well, it's the assets minus the liabilities plus the new money. Okay, and that's the same thing as the pre-money valuation plus the value of the SAFE plus the new money. Okay, so this is a different equation from the one that you see in the textbooks, which says the post-money valuation is just the pre-money valuation plus the new money. Okay, because there's extra term here, the value of the SAFE. Okay, so that's one way to do the accounting, which we'll call the liability view. Another way to do the accounting, which we can call the cap table view, is that we think of the SAFE contract as not a liability, but just as an entry that's on the cap table of the company. So in this case, the pre-money valuation is equal to the assets minus the liabilities. The post-money valuation is the assets minus the liabilities plus the new money. And that's equal to the pre-money valuation, in this case, plus the new money. So here we get exactly the textbook equation for the post-money valuation. Okay, but now you notice that what we've said is that the cap table now contains the SAFE. Right. So what that suggests is that the way that we should calculate the price of the shares that are being issued to the new investors by taking the pre-money valuation and dividing it not just by the pre-money shares, but the pre-money shares plus the number of shares that are going to be issued for the SAFE. Okay, well, so now let's do some analysis of the equity rounds involving the SAFE contract based on these two accounting viewpoints. Okay, and what we find is that the accounting viewpoint that actually appears to be most consistent with the way that the SAFEs influence the equity round is the liability view, where we have this equation that says the post-money valuation is equal to the pre-money valuation plus the value of the SAFE plus the new money. Okay, in that case, the post-money value of the shares that the new investor gets is exactly equal to the new money that the new investor has put in. And we have a nice formula for what is the valuation of the SAFE in this case. That's reasonably easy to understand. So what's the valuation of the SAFE? Well, it's the if the pre-money valuation is less than or equal to the cap, then it's equal to the money that the SAFE investor put up as their principal for the SAFE contract, and otherwise it's equal to the pre-money, the SAFE investor's money divided by the cap times the pre-money valuation. Okay, so you can think of that as the safe investor's money divided by the cap is like the amount of pre-money value that the safe investor is receiving. Okay, now, if you take what is actually in the examples that were in the documentation that Y Combinator provided, okay, which is that instead of what's at the top of the slide, instead you assume that the pre-money is equal to the price of the shares is equal to the pre-money valuation divided by the number of pre-money shares, and you take the view that the post-money valuation is equal to the pre-money valuation plus the amount of new money, then what you get is a conclusion that you have dilution of the new investor. The formula for how many shares and what is the value of the shares that the safe investor is receiving is extremely complicated, and it's hard to understand that in any sort of sensible way. Okay, so that particular way of understanding what's going on doesn't work particularly well. It seems to be very unintuitive, although it is the case that Y Combinator says that safes are not liabilities. Okay, so, and that's that second viewpoint that leads to all those complexities is the one that corresponds to liabilities. It's actually much more sensible to understand things from the point of view of that sort of from the liability view rather than the set of equations that Y Combinator's documentation provides. Okay, so it looks like on that particular understanding that Y Combinator provided, you actually get dilution of the new investor in the course of the equity round. So a rational response by the new investor is to say, well, I'm going to fiddle the numbers here so that I don't actually get diluted. Okay? And we can do that by actually decreasing the pre-money valuation on the basis of which we do the equity round, so as to ensure that we have to do a little bit of math in order to guarantee this, but we can ensure that the post-money value of the shares is actually equal to the new money that the new investor provided. Okay. And in effect, that amounts to a type of liability accounting. So where we say we have a discounted pre-money valuation, that here is the V3 minus. So how do we get that? Well, we take the pre-money valuation and we subtract the value of the safe. Okay, and then we calculate the price based on that discounted pre-money valuation. Okay, this is different from the discount that's discussed in some versions of the safe. So you were discounting the valuation. Something else. Okay, and sort of related to this particular way of understanding things, there's the way to do the equity round is that what VCs often do is they offer term sheets that say, well, I'm going to invest so much new money, and I expect to receive some percentage of the post-money valuation of the company in return for those shares. Okay, and that sort of form of the term sheet actually forces the equity round to be determined using a calculation similar to the discounting that we're talking about here. Okay, and an interesting observation here also that if you think about the value of the safe as the price that the new investor is paying for shares times the number of shares that the safe investor is receiving, then you get the same price as you get from this discounting approach from the following calculation for the price. The new price equal to the pre-money valuation divided by the number of pre-money shares plus the number of shares issued to the safe investor. Okay, and that really just corresponds to what we were saying before about cap table accounting. Okay, so this is a method that can be applied to get around the issue of dilution. Okay, And it's one that I think founders are often not aware of at the time that you're founding a company. But a lot of things to think about. And here investors say, okay, I'll use this fancy contract that we've got. I think a lot of founders don't really understand exactly what the consequences of that contract are, and the fact that at the time of the equity round, you might get this type of discounting happening in the calculations. So that's one issue with the safes. Okay, the second issue, and in order actually to complete the story that I was making here about the way that we do the discounted valuation model, is that we need to face this issue that the safes actually introduces circularity into the story. Okay, because what if we're going to apply the discounted valuation method, according to either the liability accounting or cap table accounting method, on the liability accounting method, the number of shares that we're supposed to issue for the safe depends on the price that just what the safe contract says. It depends on the price that the new investor is paying, and that price in the discounted valuation method depends on the discounted pre-money valuation, okay, which depends on the value of the safe. Okay, but the value of the safe depends on the number of shares that the safe investor receives. So we've got the circle happening here. Number of shares for the safe investor depends on the number of shares for the safe investor. If we do it using cap table accounting, then the number of shares for the safe investor depends on the price that the new investor is paying, which using the cap table accounting formula, the one that we had on the previous slide, okay, here the price depends on the number of safe shares. Okay, so again, we've got a circularity in that particular way. So how do we do these calculations? We've got this sort of circular descriptions of how to calculate things. Well, what we do is we write those descriptions as some formulas and then do a little bit of mathematics to basically we've got some conditional equations that we get out of the safe contract and the description of the equity round, and we need to do some calculations in order to solve for the variable that is the number of shares to be issued to the safe investor. Okay, then the next issue we've got to worry about is, well, given that we're doing that now, what is the meaning of pre-money valuation as it's described in the safe contract? Okay, what the pre-money safes do is they calculate the number of shares from the price paid by the new investor using a condition on the pre-money valuation. Okay, it doesn't describe in the contract how the pre-money valuation and the price for the new shares should be related. Okay, in particular, when we're using this discounted valuation method, we've got some equations to solve, which are stated using a condition on the pre-money valuation. And we need to make a decision when we solve those equations is, do we base that calculation based on the pre-money valuation that we're discounting or the discounted pre-money valuation? The contract doesn't say anything about that. The contract doesn't even contemplate that this discounted valuation method will be applied. Okay, and we've done the analysis of this question, and if you use the original pre-money valuation, what you get is a case discontinuity, which leads to the conclusion that there are some prices for the shares that are never possible when you're using this discounted valuation method. Okay, so that's rather strange. Okay. On the other hand, if you use the discounted pre-money valuation in the condition, then you can get all prices corresponding to some discounted pre-money valuation. Okay, so the conclusion of this analysis, also for reasons about sort of the discounted pre-money valuation, giving the safe holder a larger share of the company than using in the condition the pre-money valuation. That I think it makes that approach more legally defensible. So it seems to be better to use the discounted pre-money valuation when you're interpreting the safe with respect to the discounted valuation method. Okay, and if you use the discounted valuation method, then you get the following understanding of what is the value of the safe. Okay, again, two cases. The first case tells you the value of safe is equal to the money that the safe investor invested. So that's your sort of downside protection. And your upside gain is in the other case, it's formula. Okay, it's the amount of money that they invested. Or it's some fraction. Think of it this way: it's some fraction either of the pre-money valuation or the discounted pre-money valuation. Okay, depending on some case conditions, which you can state in terms of either the pre-money valuation or the discounted pre-money valuation. Okay, one issue with the discounted valuation method is that you can't apply it if the pre-money valuation of the company is less than the amount of money that the safe investor invested. Okay, because then what you get is this amount here. Basically, you get the discounted pre-money valuation as a negative number, and you get a negative price for the shares. That doesn't make sense. Okay, now, so that was the discussion about the discounted valuation method for doing the conversion of the safe contract in the context of the equity round. What apparently happens when this method is applied is that the safe investor pipes up and says, well, wait a minute, you're using this, this discounted valuation in order to calculate how many shares I get for my safe. But that's not what I understood my contract to say. My understanding of what the safe contract is that you should be using the actual pre-money valuation, not the discounted one. Okay, so then we get a dispute between the company and the safe investor and possibly the new investor participating in this argument. Okay, and apparently what this leads to sometimes is a compromise to resolve this particular conflict, is to say, okay, well, instead of the discounted pre-money valuation, what we use, rather than subtracting the value of the safe, we'll subtract the amount of money that the safe investor invested. Okay, so we use this valuation here, the pre-money valuation minus the amount of money that the safe investor provided, in order to get a valuation on the basis of which we do the equity round in the usual way. Okay, and here we get a different formula for what is the post-money valuation. It's the this varied valuation plus the money that the new investor is adding, plus the money that the safe investor paid for their safe contract. Okay, this is called the dollar invested method. There's other methods you can think of, and we've analysed that in one of our papers. So you can have the new investor say, okay, well, I'm prepared to invest this amount of money at this valuation, but I don't want to have to deal with all these complexities that you're talking about here with this discounted valuation money. So why don't you sort of get together with your safe investors and basically discharge all those safes, work out for yourselves how many shares they're going to get. And then once you've got the company back into a state where there's no safe contracts issued at all, then I'll invest my money and the standard calculations will apply, and things are nice and simple, and I can understand what's going on. Okay, so you basically do a two-stage approach to the equity round where, and one way of doing this would be to say, okay, do the equity round as if zero amount of new money was being invested at some valuation, but we use that valuation in order to force conversion of the safes. and then do a second equity round, which is a standard equity round where the new investor's money comes in and the new investor gets their shares. Okay, so that's just another way that you could actually approach all these issues that arise as to the potential conflicts between the safe investors and the new investors, because the new investor is getting diluted. And if we think about that a little bit further, then what we actually discover, and this is one of the contributions that we have in our paper, is that if the company and the new investor wanted to get nasty, they could actually structure the investment of the new investor's money into 2 rounds in such a way as to optimize the amount of money, the fraction of the company that's held by the founders after the equity round, in such a way that the safe investor loses out. Okay, now here's an example of that. It's a very extreme example, so these numbers might not be particularly realistic, but it shows the phenomenon, and it shows how bad things can get in the worst case. So suppose that we've got a safe investor, Saffron, who has a pre-money safe with principal $10,000, cap $1 million. Okay, the company does very poorly, valuation drops down to $3,000. A new investor, Neville, comes around, who has $1,500 to invest. Okay, and we do an equity round. If that equity round is done using the standard conversion method, then you get the following fractional holding for the founders, Saffron and Neville, of 21%, 69%, and the new investor getting 10%. Okay, in this case, what's happening is that the new investor, Neville, is getting severely diluted, okay, by the safe holder. So it's an example of this dilution phenomenon. Okay, based on, if this were a standard equity round, based on these numbers, the new investor would expect to have 1/3 of the company after the equity round. Okay, and that clearly isn't happening here. So they've lost about 23% of what they were expecting if you apply the standard conversion method. Now, what we can do instead is to structure things into 2 equity rounds, where in round 1, Neville invests $1,000 at pre-money valuation, $1 million, and the safes get converted. And then a second equity round where Neville invests $500 at a pre-money valuation of just $1,000, 1,003 to be precise here. And in that case, we get the following distribution of amount of the company held by the founders, the safe holder, and the new investor of 66%, 0.7% instead of 69%. For the safe holder, and for the new investor, for 1/3 of the company that they were expecting. Okay, so this way of doing things is greatly to the benefit of the founders, but there's a very severe price paid by the safe investor. They're holding just 0.7% of the company instead of 69%, which they would have according to the standard conversion method. Okay, so that's essentially, you can think of this as a type of attack against the structure of the contract, right? Where the new investor and the company collude to structure the transaction to the disadvantage of the safe holder. Okay, so now, do safe contracts provide anything to defend against this type of attack? Well, for one thing, it doesn't seem from the text, at least from our understanding of the text, that the safe holders have any rights to negotiate about the construction of the equity round. The contractor says, okay, well, if the equity round happens at this particular valuation, then you get so many shares, that's it. You know, there's no statement there that the safe investor has got rights to negotiate about the equity round. Okay, so I think the safest assumption is to assume that they don't actually have any. However, there is some text in the safe contract that might provide some basis for a legal challenge to this particular attack, where it says the following: equity financing means a bona fide transaction or series of transactions with the principal purpose of raising capital pursuant to which the company issues and sells preferred stock at a fixed pre-money valuation. Okay, so this the safe investor has some basis to argue that this two-round process was not a bona fide transaction, or that the equity financing ought to be thought of as a series of transactions, and the two rounds actually ought to be considered as a single round. And the calculation ought to be done differently as a result of that. Okay, but even with this clause there, although it provides you with some protection as the safe holder, you still have the problem that you might need to go to court in order to get a resolution of this particular issue. Okay, so then all the discussion so far has been about a situation where the company has issued a single safe contract of this particular form, but a safe with a cap but no discount. Okay, what happens if we now start thinking about situations, and this was effectively the situation that led up to Y Combinator changing their contracts in 2018, was that companies were sort of issuing multiple safe contracts before they went to their first price equity round. And if you do the calculations of the discounted valuation method in that case, so you assume that the company has issued multiple pre-money safes, all of that particular form, so there's some multiple amounts of so there's N contracts here, some amount of money and some amount of, and at some particular cap for each of those contracts. Okay, and then you try to calculate, okay, what is the value of the safe in that case? Well, then you get still this same simple formula in terms of the pre-money valuation, but the discounted pre-money valuation, but what is the discounted pre-money valuation? And for that, you get the complicated two formulas that are at the top here. It's this one and this one. Okay, and it's what it is. It's a complicated mess that depends for a particular value of the safe ends up depending on what is the for a particular safe. It depends on all the other safes that the company has issued. Okay, so if I want to understand, okay, when I'm negotiating about my safe contract with the company as an investor, how should I think about the value of what I'm buying? Well, it's going to depend in a very, very complicated way on other safe contracts that the company may issue in the future. Okay, so it's very hard for me to predict what is the value of my safe on that basis. And so where should I set the cap in my negotiation with the company, for example? Okay, so that's obviously a problem. Okay, so in part in response to this problem and some other issues that have been identified with safes along the way, in 2018, Y Combinator changed the form of the safe contracts to something called post-money safes. Okay, and what these say is that the way that we calculate now in the case of the cap and no discount post-money safe, the way that the number of shares for the safe holder is calculated is this formula. It's the maximum of the money invested by the safe holder divided by the price paid by the new investor, and the money invested by the safe holder divided by the PI, which is like the safe price for that particular safe holderized safe contract, where that safe price PI is determined by the cap, you say CI there, the cap of that particular safe divided by, again, as we sort of expect, the pre-money shares, but now the contract changes the definition of what the pre-money shares are. it's called the company capitalization in the contract. But what it is, it's the sum of the shares held by the founders and other sort of shareholders who have got straight shareholdings, plus the sum of all the numbers of shares that are going to be issued to safe investors for their contracts. Okay, so we can understand that as the way that we calculate this safe price is being done based on a valuation equal to the cap for the safe, okay, according to the cap table accounting method, okay, where we divide by not just the number of existing shares, but the number of existing shares plus the number of shares issued in the context of the equity round to the safe holders. It's still left open in this contract how you actually determine the price paid by the new investors. There's some other changes that, I mean, so there's some issues about dividends, for example, that is another change that's made in this contract. Okay, then if you set about applying the discounted valuation method, there's still a circularity, but again, that circularity can, by writing out some equations, you can resolve that circularity. And what you get here is a formula for what is the value of the safe contract if you're using these post-money safes. It's actually very easy to understand. You get the value of the safe contract is either the amount of money that the safe investor invested, okay, if the pre-money valuation is less than the cap, or it's the money that the safe investor invested divided by their cap in the contract times the pre-money valuation. So that's, you can think of that as a particular share of the pre-money valuation before the equity round happens that will add some dilution on top of that. What's the amount of the pre-money valuation that the safe holder is getting? It's equal to that amount. Okay, so that gives us a much simpler mental model of what the post-money shares do. So when you're negotiating a post-money safe, it's easier to understand what that particular contract is doing and work out in your negotiation what parameters you should be using. Okay, however, with the post-money safes, there's another issue, which is that the conditions under which you can actually do these calculations is more complicated than they are for the pre-money safes. Now, the pre-money safes are convertible using this discounted valuation method if the pre-money valuation is more than the sum of all the multiple principles of the safe contracts that have been issued. But for the post-money safes, okay, if you've got different caps, then in order to be able to apply this discounted valuation method, you need that condition plus this particular sum of these fractions is less than 1. Now you can think of these as each of these fractions is some amount of the pre-money valuation, some percentage of the pre-money valuation that the investor is getting. So the sum of those percentages should be less than 100%. So that is that equation. So that makes sense. But then you also find, so there's a separate paper that we've got about this, where we do this sort of calculation. It also turns out that there's multiple subintervals of that particular range between that minimum number and that maximum number, over which you cannot apply the discounted valuation method. There's just no solution for the equations in multiple subintervals, depending on what the caps are and what the amounts of money are that have been invested. Okay. So this is an undesirable feature of the post-money safes, I think. Okay, I'm going to skip very quickly over this in order to get to another issue before I wrap up. The talk sets there's some results in the papers that we've got that talk about, okay, under what conditions are a post-money safe and a pre-money safe equivalent. So you can find some equivalences. Those equivalences get a bit more complicated in the case of multiple safe contracts. And here the equivalence only works in the case that all the safe contracts are issued at the same cap. Okay, and there's an issue about whether you can sort of apply this particular equivalence if you don't know what is the set of contracts that's going to be issued. Okay, so there's some discussion of that in those papers. Okay, let me sort of mention the one other issue here for which we've done some analysis about the safes is with liquidity events, and what the contract, at least the pre-money safe with cap and no discount, what it says about liquidity events is that in liquidity events, the safe holder gets to make a choice. So they have a cash out option or a convert option. So the cash out option says that they receive back their initial principal, and the convert option says that, well, what we do is we convert the safe contract into shares, and then the safe holder gets a payout that's based on the percentage holding of the value that's to be distributed. But there's one twist to this, which is that the cash out amounts are senior to the conversion. So we pay the cash out first to the people who choose the cash out, and then we distribute the remaining value to the people who choose to convert. Okay. So now there's an issue with that. So if I'm holding one of these contracts, which of these moves should I make? And effectively what this does is to set up a game. There's other safe investors that may be making this choice, and what I receive because of this priority condition depends on what others do. So what's my best move in this game? So we've written a paper that does an analysis of that game, again, some issues arise here about the structure of the safe contracts that flows from this analysis. Things are pretty nice if your company issues only pre-money safes or only post-money safes. Okay, in that case, you get a nice Nash equilibrium for this game. So it's easy to understand, okay, what should my move be? Okay, but in the case you've issued mixed safes, so some pre-money safes and some post-money safes, then things are a lot more complicated, and you can have a situation there where there is no pure strategy Nash equilibrium. So you have a situation where sort of I look at, I decide what my move is, and I see what somebody else's move is, and I want to change my move all of a sudden, because by changing my move, I can get a price, get a better payout. But then they look at what I've just done, and I say, well, I'm going to change my move also. Okay? And you end up in a situation where basically go round in a circle of people keep wanting to change their move in order to optimize the amount of money that's distributed to them. Okay, so that's clearly an undesirable situation. I mean, I'd like to understand, I'd prefer to have a contract that says exactly how much I'm going to get in some scenario, rather than be put into a situation where I need to play a game where this sort of situation may come up. Okay, so to come to a conclusion then, what we've done is identified various issues with these safe contracts, from the lack of clarity about what does pre-money valuation mean, lack of clarity about exactly what conversion method is going to be applied when we have an equity round. Okay. The fact that this discounted valuation method, which seems to be the most sensible method to apply, can't actually be applied in some circumstances, and it's particularly bad with the post-money safes. Okay. And we get this sort of issue with the game theoretic conflicts arising sometimes in the case of liquidity events that seem to have difficult solutions. Okay, so what's the fundamental source of all of these problems, I think, is that what safe contracts try to do is two things: provide you with a downside protection and a share of the upside. Okay, so basically get these two conditions on what is the value of a safe. And The problem is that gives rise to all of these different issues that we've discussed is that when there's multiple safes, those obligations can add up to more than the pre-money valuation. Okay, and what the safe investor should be getting in the context of an equity round is some percentage of the pre-money valuation in shares. Okay, and if the amount we've got to distribute to all the safe holders is more than that pre-money valuation, then we've got a problem. Okay, essentially we're in a situation like bankruptcy theory, where we've got some amount of claims to some money to be distributed, okay, that exceed the amount of money that we've got to distribute. Okay? Now, bankruptcy theory itself provides a very, very large number of different answers to how you go about solving that sort of situation. And in fact, what we've got with these safe contracts is more complicated than even the situation in bankruptcy theory, because we've got another parameter here, which is what was the amount, not just the amount of claim, but also what was the amount of the original investment made by the safe investors. So that's probably not the best way to go about solving this problem. So what I think is probably best is to write the safe contract in the first place in a way that doesn't give rise to all of these issues that we've identified. And here's one proposal for how you could do that. Okay, you say that you first say upfront in the contract that the way that we actually calculate a price for the new investor's shares is using the discounted valuation method, and that guarantees that the new investor is going to be receiving shares that are of value equal to the money that they're putting in. So the new investors are going to be happy. Next, what does the safe investor get? Well, we convert the safe investor's money into shares calculated in the following way. The value of the shares that the safe investor gets, okay, is equal to the amount of money that they originally invested plus a certain fraction of what's left of the pre-money valuation after you've met all of those obligations to the safe investors. So you take the pre-money valuation, you subtract the amount of money that the safe investors originally provided, and then the holder of a particular safe gets some fraction of that amount, the amount of money divided by their cap. Okay, so that's in case the amount that's to be distributed is more than the sum of the principles of the safe contracts, and otherwise we just calculate the number of shares for each safe investor on a pro rata basis based on the value that's to be distributed. But a consequence of that is going to be that the founders lose all their shares. And if we're doing an equity round here, then we can structure things so that, okay, well, we first determine a shareholding for the safe investors and the new investor, and then I have a board meeting to decide amongst themselves how many shares they give back to the founders in order to incentivize the founders. Okay, so that's for the equity rounds, and I would propose that liquidity and dissolution events be handled in exactly the same way, using exactly this formula to calculate the value of what is to be distributed in the case of those events. Okay, so everything that I've been saying is written up in a number of papers that are on this website. So there's a lot of gory detail of the mathematics there. As I said, this is part of a project where the motivation for us was to look at understanding these contracts in order to turn them into smart contracts. And that's the topic for next week's talk. So I won't go into any of those aspects. But there's the papers that you can have a look at for the material that I've covered in this talk today. Okay, so that's what I've got to say. So happy to take questions